Hello, Patrick here again at InterQuest Church, continuing with our Sunday school class, The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ. We love this book and we highly recommend it. We're at the beginning of the church, and the last couple classes have been on John the Baptist, and we've really got the backstory, and it's phenomenal because we aren't ever taught too much about the life of John and what he was taught in his life. And so we've got, when they come back, Mary and Elizabeth were teaching John and Jesus. They went to Egypt and they were taught by some master teachers, and then they stayed there for 3 years, and then they returned home. And so John is living with his mom, and they're by these, it's called the Hills of Engedi, and there's hills and caves and stuff like that. And John is being taught by an initiate. His name is Matheno, and he's teaching about life and maybe who he really is, teaching John who he really is. And so he's living with his mom, and he's got this teacher, and he loves to be out in nature, and he learns how to be totally self-sufficient in nature and God. And so when John turns 12 years old, his mother dies. And that's been his only parent. Matheno has been the male authority figure in his life. And so when John was 12 years old, his mother died, and his neighbors laid his mother in a cave there. And John was deeply grieved and wept, Matheno said. And this is a really cool teaching that weaves through John's consciousness and then even Jesus, and it's about life. John was grieved. Matheno said, "It's not well to weep because of death. Death is no enemy of man. It's a friend who, when the work of life is done, just cuts the cords that binds the human boat to earth, that it may sail on smoother seas." Isn't that a interesting and enlightening and freeing aspect of looking at the process of death? It's no enemy of man, it's a friend. When our work is done, cuts the cord that binds us to this earth plane so that we may sail on smoother seas. Then he says, "No language can describe a mother's worth, and yours was tried and true. But she was not called hence until her tasks were done." So she had fulfilled her mission to be the mother of John, the harbinger. And John was 12. At that age back then, they were moved into adulthood. And a lot of times they were more or less taken out of the custody of their mother and given to the males of the tribe then to be raised in different trades and things like that. So her job was done, and so 12 years old, the cord's cut. And so now Matheno is John's teacher, and he really can begin to give him some greater understanding of who he is and what he's to do. And it's important for us to kind of get that understand, because John, Matheno tells him he's the harbinger. He's to prepare the way for the Christ. And then, how can I do this? What are we to do? And so in this, so he's 12 years old, and so for, say, the next 6 years, they live in this area of the country. And John is taught by Matheno the ways of life in the world, and then he starts beginning his spiritual education. And this is what he starts off with. Men need a pattern for their lives. They love to follow, not to lead. And John, you're a leader. You're a leader, get this in. The man who stands upon the corners of the paths and points the way, but does not go, is just a pointer, and the block of wood can do the same. John's was a life of action. And then Matheno tells him, you just can't tell people to do something with words. You have to do it. Your words must be made manifest. Men comprehend the inner life by what they see and do. They come to God through ceremonies and forms. And so he begins to understand, give John an understanding how men really learn. Because John is a teacher also, but his life is the teaching. It's not so much the doctrine. The simple teaching that John revealed when he came on the scene when he was 30, so this is down the road some, was to repent, turn back to God. You've turned away from God, so just turn back to God. And it's not as harsh as we might think it in our terminology when we think of it. Say, hey, it's time. Hey, y'all, it's time to turn back to God. Now, that sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? Instead of giving them a big old preaching to. Say, return to God. Return home. So it's really neat to look at that. And so when you would make men know that sins are washed away by purity in life, a symbolic rite may be introduced. And then, so the ceremony or symbolism of baptism is it's an outer symbol of an inner cleansing. To begin to, in consciousness, turn back to God. I'm going to turn back to God. And then that baptism is an outer symbol because at that time people learned by rites and symbolism and things like that. So he's carrying on the tradition of symbolism and certain religious ceremonies and rites, but he's taken another step. It's from the inner symbol of disciplining yourself to turn back to God. And then he even tells him, this rite of cleansing is a preparation rite, and they who thus are cleansed comprise the church of purity. And John the Baptist represents purity. Purity prepares the way for Christ. John prepared the way for Jesus to turn men back to God, that God love, to purify, to cleanse those thoughts, beliefs, patterns that have taken us away from God in consciousness. So through this rite, we'll begin that purification process to prepare men to begin to receive the love of God. And that's when he says, repent, turn back to God, and now why are we turning back to God? So we can purify our life. You say, it goes hand in hand. And so that through that purity, now people can begin to get a greater sense of self and be open to the love of God, be open to the presence of God. And then it goes on to say, you are to teach that men must wash, so you must lead the way. Your body must be washed, symbolic of the cleansing of the soul. So Messino said, and this is like, you can't just tell people do something and not do it. So because this is where he's preparing for the future. Okay? And John said, why need I wash? May I not go at once and wash? And you say, he's a young male action figure, and he wants to just get on with his life too. Well, why do we need to wait? And so Matheno, they go down to the river, and Matheno baptizes John at a very young age. And it's just because it was time. It's really neat. 'Tis well. And then they went down to the Jordan ford, east of Jericho, just where the hosts of Israel crossed when first entered into Canaan. They tarried for a time. And then at this time, Matheno taught him some more about who he was, what he was going to do. You are the harbinger. You're preparing the way for the Christ. Then he baptizes him. Where the Jewish nation entered into Canaan. So there's a lot of symbolism and ceremony that's going on here, but it's always this teaching to lift the consciousness higher. We all can do more than we think we can. When we begin to listen to our inner guidance, when we begin to listen to Spirit, it will be revealed what more we could do. And it's not like we have to walk on water, but we could all do more in life. And really, to just be more loving would be the adage of God. To just be more loving. And so our ability to give God love comes through purity. We can go from selfish love to selfless love. Unconditional love. So purity prepares the way for unconditional love, the love of Christ. After this, here's this. Matheno is initiate. He works at a temple in Saqqara, and it's outside of Cairo. And there's a temple there. You can go there now. It was the first step pyramid. And there are, it's called pyramid texts that are still on the walls inside this pyramid. And it's a rough pyramid. It's not like the ones at Giza. These temples were schools for their priesthood. Matheno taught at this. And then, so he takes John to the temple with him, and he is standing there, and he tells him about John, and he tells him what John's mission is in life. They welcome him with open arms, and John studies in this temple, i.e. mystery school, for 18 years, and then he begins his mission when he's 30. For 18 years, John lived and wrought within these temple gates, and here he conquered self, became a master mind, and learned the duties of the harbinger. He learned to master self. What a wonderful group of chapters in the Aquarian. And even though it's John's life, it's our life. We're here to master ourselves, to allow that Christ self to have full reign in our manifestation in our life. And so he's in the temple, and then when he was 30, he came back on the scene, true to himself. He's got his camel skins on, and he eats locusts and honey and things like that, and just comes to the city. He comes to the city, and he sits in meditation for 7 days. Doesn't say anything. In the center of town. Creating a vacuum. What does he want? People who are ready to turn back to God. And they draw to them, and then it's a simple thing. Repent, to do this, to do this. And then he starts his mission to baptize people, to get people to turn back to God and to begin that purification process. And as this process has unfolded and continued throughout the Piscean age, as we enter now into the Aquarian age, where we're beginning to understand that we can have these covenants with God within our consciousness, with intention, to begin to be the Word made manifest, to take the impetus to cleanse that which no longer serves our higher nature, our Christed beingness, to allow that to be released, and then to begin to incorporate that which would support our walk. So I love John. I love everybody. John was good. John was Elijah, returning back to his people. Yeah, God.